안녕하십니까.
Good morning, everyone. I am Kim Moon-gun at the Secretariat of NEAR for this session titled Globalization of Regions. I would like to thank the experts and the viewers who are joining us online for your participation. We are dealing with the theme of ways to invigorate exchange between the Northeast Asia regional governments. I will introduce the guests, listen to the opening remarks, welcoming remarks, listen to presentations, and then there will be a panel discussion and a photo session. We are providing Korean and English interpretation services, and this is being streamed live so that the near regional governments and members can view this session online. Before we begin, I would like to introduce to you the special guests. We have as speakers and panelists. The first speaker is Professor Kim Hyung-soo of Dankook University, who is also the president of Korean Association of Northeast Asia Studies. And the second presenter is Professor Lee Seung-gun of Kaemyung University of School of Public Services. And as panelists, we have the former ambassador to Brazil, Mr. Gu Bonu, who has served at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we also have the senior researcher Seo Jin-gyo at Kiev. He was the trade advisor to the trade minister. And we have Professor Yang Gi-ho of Sungkonghoe University at the Department of Japan Studies. He is the commissioner of Korea-Japan Future Forum. And as the representatives from the hosts, we have the Secretary General Ok Jae Kim of Association of Northeast Asia Regional Governments and Trade and Foreign Affairs Director of Gyeongsang-Bokdo Province, Mr. Han Jae-sung. We would like to listen to the opening remark by Secretary General Kim Ok-chae. He has served as the minister at the Korean Embassy in Japan and at the Consulate General of Korea in Fukuoka.
오늘 대한민국
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased that we're hosting the session on globalization of regions together with Gyeongsang-Bokdo Province on the topic of globalization and regions in order to discuss exchanges among regional governments in Northeast Asia. I would like to express my gratitude to those who will be serving as presenters and panel members from the government as well as the academia. Thank you very much for your contribution. I would also like to extend my appreciation to 78 regional government officials from 6 Northeast Asian countries, as well as general viewers who are watching this session on the online platform. This year, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, people-to-people exchanges between countries have been suspended. And now we have to interact with one another via online. And once again, we are reminded of the importance of human touch and people-to-people exchanges. We are faced with many restrictions due to the pandemic, but we still need to promote exchanges and cooperation with regional governments in Northeast Asia in order to search for ways to achieve co-prosperity and development. In that sense, I believe that this session is going to help you find new ways forward for exchanges and cooperation in the post-pandemic era. Even though this session is being held in Seoul, Korea, I hope that all of you will consider the session to be held virtually in your countries of Japan, China, Mongolia, Russia, and other near member countries. I also hope that vaccines and treatments will be developed soon so that we can meet in person, and also that regional governments can carry out their international exchanges and various events. And with that, I'd like to conclude my remarks. Thank you.
총장님 말씀 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. And now, Director Lee Chul-woo of Gyeongsang-buk-do Province has given us his remark, and Mr. Han Jae-sung, Director of Trade and Foreign Affairs at Gyeongsang-buk-do Province, will read his remarks. These are the remarks from the Governor Lee Chul-woo of Gyeongsang-buk-do Province. I would like to read on his behalf. I'd like to congratulate the Global Korea Convention. This is a chance to look into ways in which Korea can become a leading nation post-COVID-19 through the solidarity and cooperation between government and public institutions. This is a very meaningful convention, and it is meaningful to be talking about ways to invigorate exchange among the Northeast Asian regional governments. I would like to thank the special guests, speakers, discussants, and all the online participants for your conference, and I welcome you all to this conference. Of course, in order to open up a new era of peace and prosperity, we need to be able to talk about the future. The regional governments are free from national interest because they are not central governments, and NEAR started with 29 regional governments in 4 nations in Northeast Asia. It was launched in Gyeongju, Korea. It has grown to 78 regional governments from 6 countries. Gyeongsang-buk-do Province has led the launch of NEAR and is home to the permanent secretariat. And we have worked hard to extend exchange and benefits of the regional governments who are our members. And going forward, we believe that the role that NEAR can play will greatly enhance. Unfortunately, we see that the barriers between and among the countries are heightening due to COVID-19. But despite this, we need international solidarity more than ever to respond to the pandemic. I hope that in that sense, today's conference will greatly contribute to exchange and cooperation in Northeast Asia. I hope this will be a meaningful opportunity to find ways to invigorate exchange between the Northeast Asia regional governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Lee. Next, we're going to invite the presentations. There are 2 keynote presentations prepared for you. The first presenter is Professor Kim Hyung-soo of Dankook University. He's going to talk about ways to invigorate exchange among Northeast Asian regional governments. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As has been introduced, I am Kim Hyung-soo. I work at Dankook University in the College of Public Administration. I'm also serving as the chairman of the Korean Association of Northeast Asian Studies. I'm going to discuss how to promote exchange among Northeast Asian regional governments. And I understand that there are many officials who are participating online from China, Japan, and other near member countries. I would like to focus more on the cases of Korea, and I hope that my presentation is going to be informative for you as well. This is the session on globalization of regions, and in my presentation, I'd like to discuss how regional governments in Korea, China, and Japan can promote exchange with other regional governments. Recently in Korea, since 2016, the Act on Public Diplomacy was enacted, and there is a lot of attention and interest in public diplomacy, and we have been developing various policies to promote public diplomacy for Korea. And in that context, I'd like to discuss how the Korean regional governments have been promoting public diplomacy. So that's going to be the overview, and then let me go into my presentation. Please look at the slides on the screen. Largely, there are 4 parts in my presentation. First of all, I'm going to discuss the concept of public diplomacy because it can be defined in many different ways in the academia. But I will go right into the main messages. Secondly, when we were discussing diplomacy, it was mainly conducted by central governments. But how can we promote diplomacy at the regional governments? This is a big question. When you look at the European countries, they have division of central government and local governments. But in the Asian continent, especially in Korea, there has been a lack of divide between central government diplomacy and local government diplomacy. So, having said that, at the regional government level, what can they do to promote public diplomacy? What contents do they need? There are 6 countries in Northeast Asian region, but I won't be able to cover Mongolia or Russia due to my language limitations. But I focused on China and Japan and Korea and how regional governments in these 3 countries are promoting public diplomacy. I don't know if this is going to be relevant to other countries, and I hope that there will be implications for other countries. But in order for a regional government to promote public diplomacy, what strategies do they need to take? That's going to be the main content of my presentation. First of all, I need to look over various definitions of public diplomacy in the research. In the past, diplomacy was mainly focused on the state government level, but there are many different views you can apply for public diplomacy. There was the 9/11 terror attack in the US, and after that, the importance of public diplomacy has been rising. Now there is a shift away from state-centric diplomacy to multi-centric diplomacy. From the perspective of the regional government, how should we understand public diplomacy? In the past, diplomacy was carried out by the state government, but when you look at the city-states in Europe, there are many different forms of diplomacy that have been carried out by city governments as well. So it means that cities and regional governments can substitute or complement state government diplomatic activities, and this can be called para-diplomacy. So there is a parallel diplomacy between central and local governments. And some scholars use terms such as projection diplomacy and advocacy diplomacy. But what I want to focus on is this notion of city diplomacy and catalytic diplomacy. The Korean peninsula is divided, and sometimes, even though we have the Ministry of Unification at the central government, sometimes regional governments can promote inter-Korean exchanges to improve the inter-Korean relations. And recently, Australia and China had this wine controversy. In the pandemic, there were all these discussions on where all this began, and there was a dispute between China and Australia. Australian wine has been consumed by lawmakers and politicians in Europe, and this is related to diplomacy based not only on politics and economy, but also on the public and citizenship. It is all about promoting the image of a country at the general public level and at the grassroots level. So in that sense, I can say that public diplomacy can play an important role. Now, with Korea and China and Korea and Japan, and with China and Australia, there are many of these relationships that are forming and evolving. And when there are some issues between countries, regional governments can play a role in promoting public diplomacy and resolving or addressing these conflicts. In the past, diplomacy was carried out by the state governments, but in the 20th century now, there is more public diplomacy activities targeting citizens of another country. And this is all about promoting the image of a country and the culture to other countries. And now we're moving beyond that we have many state and non-state actors that are involved in public diplomacy, including civil organizations and NGOs and local governments. And they are exchanging and they're promoting exchanges with various non-state actors in other countries. So this is indeed the 21st century new public diplomacy. Now, I'd like to give you an overview of the scholastic discussion of public diplomacy. I am sure that you're familiar with this, so you may refer to my presentation slides for more detail. In the past, diplomacy was mainly centered on the central government, and there was a very limited scope. But now we have many civil governments, civil organizations, and local governments involved in public diplomacy. The scope of public diplomacy is very wide. For instance, BTS, a Korean idol group, is very popular globally. And before that, we had a singer named Psy, and his song was a global hit. And these can be part of public diplomacy as we're promoting our culture. So these kinds of activities are not done by government actors, but by private sector actors. And there are direct and indirect ways of promoting public diplomacy. So, for instance, as I mentioned, Korean music being exported and entertainment industry being consumed in other countries. And these activities are part of public diplomacy. For instance, people in Africa would sing and dance along with Psy's music. And that was the first of such a global success in the past before we have BTS. So that was a very interesting case. Now, how can we approach public diplomacy from the perspective of Korea? The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is leading public diplomacy. When you look at this structure, there are three elements of diplomacy. The first component is traditional diplomacy, and secondly, economic diplomacy, and finally, the third element is public diplomacy. There are a lot of discussions, but scholars like Jo Sung-rae would say that we need to utilize soft power, but we have to have hard power in place so that we can exercise soft power, especially in Asia. When you look at the soft power indicators, China, Japan, but of course Japan is ranked higher than China, and then we have Korea and Singapore. So these four countries are ranked as part of top 20. But when you look at the traditional diplomacy and economic diplomacy, China may have the strongest soft power, but indeed, when you look at the ranking, China is lower than other countries in terms of soft power ranking. And in 2016, the Public Diplomacy Act was legislated, and based on this act, regional governments were able to promote public diplomacy. Since 2010, public diplomacy was promoted in Korea by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and many policies were implemented for public diplomacy. And in 2016, the Public Diplomacy Act was legislated. And based on this act, now regional governments can play a role in promoting public diplomacy. So they are recognized as key actors. Now we have 4 or 5 years passed. Once again, from the government, central government, the scope of public diplomacy, there are 3 domains. One of the key characteristics of public diplomacy is cultural diplomacy, and then policy diplomacy, and then finally knowledge diplomacy. I don't think I need to provide additional information because it is very intuitive. Knowledge diplomacy is about promoting the proper understanding of Korea to other countries. So these are the 3 domains, but are they all or exhaustive? This is a big question. Now, Next, how can regional governments promote public diplomacy? I can approach this question from 4 perspectives. In short, I can say that decentralized cooperation can be strengthened by city governments, unlike the central government, because we do not have embassies or official diplomatic channels. Regional governments will engage in exchanges with citizens in other regional governments. So this is more about citizen participation-based public diplomacy. Therefore, I believe that this has a lot of influence compared to state-level diplomacy. It can be seen as a niche diplomacy, and public diplomacy can promote better ties among countries. And at the same time, we can move beyond national borders, and we can exercise and utilize social power to promote the status of the country at the regional government level. So I believe that public diplomacy conducted by regional government is very important. So far, public diplomacy has been carried out before the law was enacted in the form of friendship and sisterhood relationship. In 1963, Jinju City formed a sisterhood relationship with the city of Eugene in Oregon, and that is the beginning of sisterhood relationship at the local government level. So there are 2 forms of relationships. First one is sisterhood relationship, and the other is friendship. One of the key issues here is about trade and economic relations and attracting foreign investment, and these are considered economic diplomacy at the central government. So there has been a demand for including these economic diplomatic activities as part of public diplomacy. And there was a new revision of this act that was passed by the National Assembly. So I hope that there will be improvements in this area. When you examine public diplomacy in Korea, I'm not sure if other countries are having similar experiences, but when I look at the Korean public diplomacy, there were some limitations. We were relatively passive in engaging in exchanges, and there were particular people who would lead public diplomacy, and that had limitations. And also there was a lack of understanding on the other party. And there are some distance issues because we're far away from the Americas and Europe and Africa. In some cases, some public diplomacy efforts at the local governments were one-off events. So you can summarize the limitations into 4 categories. First of all, there was lack of information, there is lack of activism, and also there is lack of content because of geographical distance, and finally there was a lack of content. Now let's take a look at the examples of other countries. First of all, China. How China is promoting public diplomacy. There is Confucius Institute that is well established. The Confucius Institute, however, was driven by the central government of China. So now in the US and some other countries, Confucius Institutes have been dwindling. But now the government of China is trying to revitalize the Confucius Institute by establishing this as a private organization so that this can be serving as a channel for public diplomacy for China. Now, there is an association called Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, and this has been well promoted. Now, in collaboration with regional governments, the association is carrying out various activities. Let's move on to the cases of Japan. In Japan, they have the Public Diplomacy Strategy Division that is in charge of promotion, culture, and diplomacy. And this division is carrying out various promotional activities And you can consider this as a division dedicated to public diplomacy at the Japanese government. And one more part of Japan's case that I want to introduce to you is that there is a council called CLARE. It's the Council of Local Authorities for International Relations. And CLARE has 7 chapters in many different countries. What is interesting is that each chapter has its own strategic priority. In North America, the North American chapter focuses on knowledge exchanges, and in Europe, they focus on promoting the interests of Japanese local governments. So each chapter has its own strategic objective. Another interesting program is called the JET program in Japan. And here, the JET program would invite students from overseas. So far, 70,000 students have been invited from 75 countries. And last year, 5,900 students visited Japan, and they would engage in activities with various local governments in Japan. How is it operated? Of course, this is aimed at promoting and revitalizing the local economy. And when you look at the organizational structure, there's the JET program. And by utilizing the JET program, there will be 3 central government agencies that are involved. And of course, the practical matters will be dealt with by CLARE. And there's an issue of funding, so they put priority on securing financial resources, and there are many different financial schemes to utilize to support JET program, and this is something that we can learn in Korea. So you looked at the cases of China and Japan compared to Korea. In the past, we had high politics centered on the central government, but now we need to utilize diplomatic decentralization and public diplomacy at the regional government level so that regional governments can play a key role as diplomatic actors. Let's take a look at the history of the public diplomacy in Korea. And you can see this table. We are mainly engaging public diplomacy with nearby countries, including China and Japan. And in Eurasia, we have relations with Mongolia and the US. So public diplomacy at the regional government level was mainly focused on China, Japan, and the US. And we also have some exchanges with Russia and the Philippines. There are 11 different types of exchanges promoted by the regional governments in many different areas. Public diplomacy activities have been carried out. So we are already beyond the scope of public diplomacy dictated in the law. There is knowledge, there is politics, and there is culture. And Korean regional governments have been engaged in policy exchanges, knowledge exchanges, and culture exchanges. But there are some inherent limitations in public diplomacy by regional governments. And because there are many differences in our political circumstances, there are external limitations as well. And even though we have the Minister of Foreign Affairs, we need a control tower that can govern public diplomacy in Korea. In short, these are the kinds of strategies we need to pursue. First of all, we need to engage in public diplomacy based on a firm identity of the local government. And in that sense, we need to cater to the international needs, and regional governments have to come up with their own policies based on their firm identity, and then they have to establish their own public diplomacy strategies based on so-called RISE public diplomacy. And these are the kinds of roles that they can play. In the interest of time, I would have to skip some of the slides, and thank you very much for your attention.
김영수 교수님께서
Thank you very much. Professor Kim Hyung-soo talked about public diplomacy, And now we will invite Professor Lee Seung-gun of Keimyung University, who was the former president of Korean Society of Contemporary European Studies, who is going to talk about ways to invigorate exchange between Northeast Asia regional governments based on the realities of exchange between European local governments. Good morning. I am Lee Seung-gun, as was introduced. I would like to thank the hosts 2020 Global Korea Convention, and the session is headed by Gyeongsang-Buk-do Province and NEAR. So I'd like to thank the two hosts of the Globalization of Regions session. And I would like to thank the online participants of the NEAR regional governments and our members for your active participation. You may refer to the slides. I am going to talk about ways to invigorate exchange between Northeast Asia regional governments based on the realities of exchange between the European local governments. And why did I mention focusing on AER, Assembly of European Regions? Let's look to the following slides. So at the end of the day, Europe has done quite a good job. There was the EU and there were the regional governments who provided a lot of feedback and opinions to the EU. They were quite active on that front. NEAR, I think, can gather a lot of insight from the European model. And so I'd like to go into detail into what AER has done so far. And so, after a brief introduction, I'd like to talk about the launch and the status of AER, its characteristics and structure, and the cooperative relationship between the EU and the European regional governments. The cooperation still continues to this day, and I'd like to talk about the exchange amongst the European regional governments and what implications does the European model have on the exchange facilitation in the Northeast Asia region, and then I will conclude. NEAR is emphasizing reciprocity and equity. And under the spirit of reciprocity and equity, the regional governments are linked together and they also network with the international bodies. And in the same vein, the NEAR always remembers the spirit of reciprocity and equity, and that has to be at the very top of their minds. And not only Northeast Asia, but we can contribute to world peace. And so that's what I'd like to focus on. And Cohen, he is a neoliberalist scholar and he's very much focused on international cooperation. There could be difference of opinions between different governments, but what does cooperation mean? The regional governments and different actors must coordinate their different policies, and NEAR plays a very vital role as the coordinator. And so there are expected positions of different parties, and there needs to be cooperation amongst the regional governments at the sub-national level and at the government level. And like the EU, we could establish cooperative bodies, and NEAR can lead this initiative. We have the AER in Europe, and we have signed an MOU. So there is an MOU between NEAR and AER. We will focus on AER first because we can learn not only about the cooperation in Europe, and we can gather insight that can be applicable to Northeast Asia. Right now, I looked up the website, and there have been 4 MOUs signed: AER, and also with the Institute of Oriental Studies of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and with R20, and with ICLEI. And so NEAR is quite an active partner in the world arena, and I think you need to further expand your network. Let's look at the history of AER. European integration, as you remember, it goes back to 1967. It started with the European community. And what will the regional governments do when Europe is integrated? And their voices cannot be individually heard at the EC. And after 20 years, AER was formed to represent the regional governments at the European level. And other than that, there's the regional bodies and the Council of the EU, and it has a lot of impact on the funding and the decision making at the EU level. I'm going to talk about this later. In 1990, AER. So the Cold War era ended, and we have many international bodies, but AER has published the Tabula Regionum European for the first time. And I think NEAR can emulate this, showing that Asia is not just composed of countries, but also of regions. And the Maastricht Treaty was signed, and the principle of subsidiarity was adopted. What this means is the EU does not take action unless it is more effective than action taken at national, regional, and local level. So this is the famous principle of subsidiarity. NEAR, I think, can take lessons from this. There are local governments and regional governments and national governments in Northeast Asia. And in implementing the policies, the regional government's opinions and voices can be heard at a higher level. And that has been achieved by AER in the European context. Regionalism was promoted in 1995 in Europe. And for your reference, this was the process of European integration. Why was Europe integrated? There were so many wars, including the 2 world wars. And so they felt the need for Europe to come together. And in 1952, ECSC was launched. That was the beginning. And it has evolved into EU. Unfortunately, internally, there were many conflicts, and the UK exited with the final decision at the referendum, and thus the Brexit. The map shows the 27 member states of EU. There are many regional governments in the area. Through the AER and through individual means, they advise the EU, and there is cooperation, and they're leading the future of Europe. So there is a lot that NEAR can do, looking at what AER has done so far. And this is the regional map of Europe. I hope that in NEAR we can have a display of regional governments that are active.
그러니까 유럽이 이게 이제 협력이 잘 되다 보니까
There has been a lot of cooperation, and so many different bodies and organizations have cooperated to make this cooperation more feasible. And AER is connected to all these international bodies. And I think the same can be achieved by NEAR. I think NEAR should and can expand its network. And so continuing with the status of AER, looking at the last bullet, the last treaty to be signed in the EU is the Lisbon Treaty, and it talks about multi-level governance. And all the institutions must lead at different levels, and this is what multi-level governance is about. And AER is recognized as one of the main actors of multi-level governance. And then what is the characteristic of AER? EU has 27 member nations and AER has a wider membership. Even if it's not an EU member nation, Russia and Turkey is included in AER. We have Russia and China in NEAR. There are liberalist countries and non-liberalist countries in NEAR. And likewise, AER had embraced the former communist countries as well. And so within the AER, there are 250 autonomous governments and there are 15 regional bodies. And they have impact on the EU, Council of Europe, and UNDP. This is a UN international organization. And so throughout these efforts, AER acts as a sort of a lobbyist. And I think NEAR can also lobby for its interest to the national governments and to the Northeast Asia regional bodies and represent the local governments and have a visible impact. And I think NEAR should position themselves like that. So in understanding AER, EU can connect to the regional governments through AER. And so we do have higher expectations for the regional governments to become more active players. This shows the distribution of AER member states. Russia is included here. Turkey is also included. And the Scandinavian countries are all colored green. Norway is not an EU member state, but it is part of AER. Indirectly, it has some impact in the EU decision-making. Looking at the important bodies of AER, there is the Executive Board, General Assembly, Political Bureau, and committees. And we have to look at these committees. Committee 1 it deals with economy and regional development, and they do implement bodies. And Committee 2 is social policies and public health, and Committee 3 is dedicated to culture, education, and youth. We have to devote some time and effort to education of the youth because they are the next generation leaders. And despite the COVID-19 pandemic, through Zoom and through YouTube, there's training and teaching of the youth, and AER is quite active in this front. And so I was inspired. So we need to have the youth take on a more positive perspective toward the regional governments, and they're doing a lot of that outreach. And we have the Secretary General and Director from NEAR. And you need to branch out and form other subsidiary organizations. AER has Youth Regional Network and Monitoring and Evaluation Group and Election Committee. And so the second one, Monitoring and Evaluation Group, what they do is they monitor and evaluate the achievements of AER. And there's the election committee so that officials are elected and they have good leadership. And they have the AER Euro Odyssey, and there's the Summer Academy. Many programs are operated, and this was quite encouraging and inspiring at the same time. And there is close cooperation between the EU and the European regional governments. The local governments form the third level of the multi-level governance. There is the EU international level, and then there is the national government, and the regional governments act as a very important sub-national player. And AER supports the upper tiers, and European Union is practicing multi-level governance. And I don't know if that can be possible in Northeast Asia, but I think it is possible. Russia, Mongolia, China, North Korea, I think we could have multi-level governance so that the regional government's voices can be heard at the upper level. And so there needs to be a triad of subnational, national, and supranational governments that form the multi-level governance. And in Europe, there's the Committee of the Regions, AER, and regional governments speak up at the committee. And this is the body of the EU. There's the European Council, the European Commission. The regional governments through AER can have influence on the major bodies of the EU. There's the European Parliament, European Court of Justice, and then the European Court of Auditors. And I'm showing you some signs of the headquarter buildings of these different entities. And AER and the EU each separately make decisions, and at the same time, AER can have some influence on EU's decision making. And this is a very important diagram. This is the major decision making bodies colored in blue, and advice can be given by the AER and the individual regional governments, and they have some impact and influence through lobbying on the decisions and policies made. And same for the legislative procedure. AER has some say in the legislative process indirectly. What are some of the activities that AER is engaged in? They influence on the decision making, and they have the knowledge. They provide advice based on knowledge, and they take action. There are many programs through which they take action and cooperation, and AER is the central hub, and not only with the European institutions. They have a partnership with other regional networks, and they also have alliances with thematic networks. And I think this is near. And within the world of the AER, if we include the world of near, I think the list of to-dos becomes more visible. I know I'm giving near a lot of homework. We can replace near, we can replace AER with near, and I think we could have a wider network. AER trains the unemployed youth, and I think there could be a similar youth program at the near. And we listen to the voices of the youth through different channels in AER. And there's the business forum. AER connects with many businesses and has regional business forum. So the businesses based in different regions get together, and this forum was held in November this year, and Serbia participated in the forum. We could have potential members in near, including North Korea and Russia, and we could have a similar regional business forum. And there are networks amongst the European regional governments, and please read them at your leisure. And there are thematic networks. And so this is my concluding remark. Why is NEAR important? Because we need the NEAR-like institutions, because we rely on neoliberalism for international cooperation. Even if we don't want, through regimes and through international bodies, the structure is set for international cooperation. And as EU has evolved, NEAR can have this roadmap and can grow gradually. And we need to benchmark AER. And so I hope that you will pay due attention to the European model. And we have different ideas and opinions in Northeast Asia, and NEAR should play the coordinator. We had the six-party talks in 2009. The talks have been suspended, and there is nothing that is being achieved in the region, and I think NEAR should step up. We need visibility, information, there needs to be close contact, and there needs to be support for the players. And we need to also connect with other bodies like Shanghai Cooperation Organizations, with ASEM, ASEAN, and with APEC. I know it's not going to be easy in Northeast Asia because there are territory disputes, historical issues, and North Korean nuclear issues. But in the neoliberalist age, even if the countries do not want to cooperate, the times are calling for cooperation, and if NEAR sets the foundation, then the countries will be willing to cooperate. I hope that we can emulate the AER model. As a professor who has engaged in the European studies, this is my hope. I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
예, 이성근 교수.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee Sung-gun, for your presentation. You have given us a lot of homework, a lot that NEAR has to do in the future. This is the end of the presentation portion of the program. Please give them a warm round of applause. We will now have the panel discussion. Before we begin the panel discussion, we would like to have a short break. Right now, it's 9:52 a.m., and we are going to begin the panel discussion session at 10 a.m. Thank you.
예, 이번 토론 시간에는 동북아 자치단체 연합 김옥채 사무총
For the panel discussion, we will invite Secretary General Kim Ok-chae for moderating the session, and we will also have Gu Bon-woo, former ambassador to Brazil, senior researcher Seo Jin-kyo of Ki-app, and Professor Yang Gi-ho of Seonggong-hae University, and Han Jae-sung, director in charge of diplomatic and trade at Gyeongsangbuk-do province.
주제 발표를
Yes, we have the two professors who had given us presentations, Professors Kim Hyung-soo and Lee Seung-gun. You prepared a lot. I'm sorry that we could not give you much time for enough presentation. And we have the four panelists. Thank you for coming. This is how we will proceed with the panel discussion. The session is titled Ways to Invigorate Exchange Between the Northeast Asia Regional Governments. And so I'd like to ask the panelists to comment or question the speakers and make recommendations about ways to invigorate exchange. But I'm sorry to tell you that we only have 40 minutes dedicated for panel discussion, so I can only give you 7 minutes maximum for each panelist. We will have two rounds. First, we will limit the time for 5 minutes for the first round for each panelist, and then if we have time left, we'll have a second round of questions and comments. And I'd like to ask the speakers to respond to the comments and questions after all the questions have been asked. And this is a technical issue. We are providing simultaneous interpretation. Please make your messages clear and concise. Thank you very much. And I would like to ask Ambassador Gu Bon-woo. Ambassador Gu, you have been a diplomat for over 35 years, and I'm sure you have a lot of experience in public diplomacy. I think you have a lot to say. Please.
김옥채 총장
Secretary General Kim Ok-chae, thank you very much for your introduction. There were two presentations. I really enjoyed them as they are scholars. From my perspective as a career diplomat, when I was listening to the presentations, I was able to understand the overall directions that NEAR has to go in the future, and there are many wonderful proposals. So in that sense, I would like to share my views on these presentations. First of all, concerning the presentation by Professor Lee Seung-gun, he gave an overview of the AER.
주된 대상으로 해서
So his presentation was focused on AER in 1992 until 1995. I was working as part of the Korean representative to the EU, and I was able to witness firsthand the European sentiment right before the Maastricht Treaty was signed. And so his talk was quite, it brought me memories. There's talking about regionalism in the EU. It is quite different from the regionalism in Northeast Asia, needless to say. Since the feudal system in the Middle Ages, they've had a different system, and there has been autonomy, almost close to sovereignty, that has been guaranteed to each regional government, and that has continued to this day. And there was talk of supranational EU integration. The EU was formed, and when the talk first came out, there was a lot of resistance coming from the people, the citizens, and the regions. The EU will not be able to reflect the different regional interests, and the EU will be just pushing out unilateral policies, and the people were afraid that their autonomy would be hurt. And so that was the birth of regionalism in the EU, and that is the founding, that is at the basis.
With respect to Professor Kim's presentation on public diplomacy, and promoting exchanges among regional governments. I believe that it contained all the answers. He pointed out some of the limitations and challenges and what we need to do in the future. As Secretary General Kim Ok-chan mentioned when he was introducing myself, I have some experiences as a career diplomat, and I'd like to make some comments based on my own personal experience as a diplomat. We're now discussing public diplomacy in promoting exchanges among regional governments. I think that this is a good approach, and it is a valuable approach, of course. But in reality, when you try to exchange with other regional governments, there are some national government diplomacy, and we don't have to care too much about what the central government is trying to do in terms of diplomacy because regional governments have their own interests. And as was mentioned in the presentation, there aren't many commonalities among regional governments in Northeast Asia. So it's not easy to form friendship among governments in Northeast Asia because of many reasons. So public diplomacy will happen as a consequence, but the primary objective is to promote understanding among regional governments, and we have to think about what we can gain from exchanges with other regional governments, and that should be our number one priority. And based on my experience, I would like to say that when there is sisterhood relationship, it's called a sister cities, right? And in French or other languages, they sometimes use the expression twin city or jumelage in French. So they used this notion of twins. In the Asian culture, I think that it should be called as brotherhood rather than sisterhood because we have this brotherhood notion in the Oriental culture. Then why do we use the term sisters? When males get together and form brotherhood, they may be a little dry and not enough emotional touch, but when sisters are together, there is a lot of emotional connection and at the deeper level. Maybe that's why the sister is used for such relations. And that is my first round comment. Thank you.
감사합니다.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Gu gave us some comments. We need not be too mindful of different aims and objectives of the regional governments. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Seo Jin-kyo from Kiev. He has researched multilateral trade of WTO and bilateral trade policies in FTA, and he is an expert on agricultural trade. As to cooperation amongst the regional governments, I'm a layperson, and I was able to learn a lot from the two presentations. From a trade and commerce perspective, in dealing with China and Japan and having negotiated with them, we do have personal conversations on the sidelines. Listening to Professors Kim Hyung-soo and Lee Seung-gun, I thought about how we can have more exchange amongst the regional governments in Northeast Asia. I think their positions are different and should be different from the central governments. And as was mentioned by Professor Kim Hyung-soo, each regional government has its unique identity and culture and philosophy, and they need to hold on to that. Otherwise, the cooperation will not be sustainable. I think the theme of cooperation should be directly related to enhancing the quality of life of the residents, and it has to directly reflect the interest of the residents. And then we can find the connection with the central governments. And the regional governments can still have their colors intact. As for garbage recycling, this is directly related to the people's lives. And Region A had some success in certain waste recycling policies, but certain aspects had issues, and they're looking to other regional governments or in the same country or in different countries for advice. And I think this is a matter of mutual interest. And so we can start small, anything that is directly related to the people's lives. And I can think of many examples. I live in Seocho-gu of Seoul, and some zones are designated as no smoking areas. And what happens when certain zones are designated as non-smoking areas? And there are certain programs like we have the aging societies in Northeast Asia, and we could have some health programs for the elderly, and the regional governments have a lot of these programs in place. And so people could share notes. How effective was your program? Did the elderly residents appreciate the health programs? Do you think this is a good policy? Do they feel that this is a good policy? This is directly related to the people's lives. So I think the regional governments can invigorate exchange starting from that. And we can think of different age groups. The younger people have different ideas from the older people. The youth are the next generation leaders. And if we have more exchanges with and amongst the younger generation, then this will lead to a more active cooperation as they get older between the different areas. So we can think of many youth programs. And I have many ideas, but I will keep them later for the second round. Thank you.
예, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. He mentioned that public diplomacy efforts need to be related to the lives of the residents. And in doing so, we can promote exchanges among regional governments that can be mutually beneficial. Now, moving on to the third discussant, we have Professor Yang Gi-ho from the Department of Japan Studies at Sungkonghui University. He has been giving lectures on Korea-Japan exchanges between regional governments, and he also served as a vice president of Korean Association of Regional Governments. So please go ahead. Thank you for your introduction. I enjoyed the two presentations by Professors Kim Young-soo and Lee Seung-gun. I can say that these presentations were of utmost quality. In addition, these presentations covered countries of NEAR. We have 6 countries in NEAR and more than 70 regional governments. So this is very meaningful that we're holding this session. When you look at the regional governments that are part of NEAR, there are some regions that have been neglected or less developed. NEAR has a long history, but its activities have been quite limited, maybe because of the different levels of development of all these regional governments. But now it is time to change. I hope that NEAR will become more active in playing its role. As you may know, in 1978, China began its reform, and in 1985, Japan promoted overseas exchanges, and in 1990, we declared globalization. So in Northeast Asia, all these countries wanted to promote economic development. As you know, China, Japan, and Korea in terms of population and trade volume. And when you look at the GNPs, they take up a large portion of the global economy. Someone talked about Europe, but when you think about trade between Korea and China, Korea and Japan, it is much more than the trade volume between France and Germany. So we have had a lot of achievements in Northeast Asia economically and in terms of trade. In Japan and also in Korea and in China, of course, also in Russia, especially in the Far East, there have been many investments for the past 10 years. And also in Mongolia, they have achieved economic development. And of course, North Korea, we still have a long way to go, but it has a lot of potential. So given these situations, I hope that NEAR will become more active. Now there is this new Cold War between the US and China, and we still have nuclear issues. In order to address these challenges, NEAR has a role to play. We talked about the cases in Europe, and there's regionalism in Europe. So the regionalism can be promoted even at the national government because of the deeply rooted tradition of Christianity. But in Northeast Asia, we are divided by the oceans, and there are different levels of development among these countries. So in these situations, we need to promote bottom-up approach with the involvement of the regional governments and companies at the grassroots level. In that sense, I have been watching and observing NEAR, and I had a lot of expectations, but so far NEAR has not been meeting these expectations. But when you think about the potential and the kinds of contribution that NEAR can make, there's a lot that NEAR can do. And one more comment that I want to make is when you look at the relations between France and Germany in 1950, France stretched out their hands to Germany. That was just 5 years after the Second World War. You can see how there was painful memories and hatred between the two countries. And there was more than 1 million French people who died in the war. But then France extended its hand to Germany. At that time, Germany was divided, but they formed the City Mayors Association between the two countries. There are many exchanges and more than 1,600 types of exchanges between France and Germany. Even though they were fighting against each other in the war, regional government level exchanges at the grassroots were quite effective. So in 1963, they signed a treaty, and in 2007, they designated the Friendship Year in January for France and Germany at the local government level, and there are many events taking place in commemorating this special day. So in that sense, of course, we have some historic issues among China, Japan, and Korea, but I believe that we need to extend our hands to these people, and we do have a potential to serve as a hub in Northeast Asia. So having said that, even though we have territorial disputes and other issues, I believe that Korea has capabilities and competency in extending our hands to these two countries. Thank you.
예, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. NEAR could be a more active player. You have given us some sound advice. And as the Secretary General of NEAR, I do feel a huge sense of responsibility. The NEAR platform is a useful platform. Hamgyeongbuk-do and Rasan Special City are members of NEAR, but due to the circumstances, they cannot physically participate. But we should take the initiative more strongly. And of course, you mentioned the Korea-Japan relations. I think we should have more confidence and be more active in improving the relations. Yes, we will take your word to heart. And as the last panelist in the first round, I would like to ask Director Han Jae-sung of Gyeongsang-buk-do Province, who is the co-host. And very unique as a regional government official, he has been dispatched to the U.S. for a long time and is responsible for public diplomacy in Gyeongsang-buk-do Province. I would like to thank the NEAR Secretariat for your hard work behind preparing this session. The panelists have emphasized the importance of the regional governments and their cooperation in the Northeast Asia, and I do feel the responsibility since the Secretariat of NEAR is based in Gyeongsang-buk-do Province. I think the most important spirit is mutual respect and the spirit of co-prosperity, and we need to engage in sustainable projects. What can Gyeongsang-buk-do do best? We have overcome economic challenges and we became one of the top 10 largest economies. And this was driven by the Semaul movement. And we could share the knowledge with the third world countries. We have advanced agro-technology and Gyeongsang-buk-do can excel in sharing the agricultural technologies. And we put a lot of weight on the Semaul movement and we cooperate with other nations. 56 villages and 15 nations, they have been applied the Semaul movement and they built Semaul villages. There have been environmental improvements, there are medical and education programs, and agricultural technologies have been disseminated. These are really feasible programs, and 5 years worth of budget and human resources from Korea are allocated to the projects. And so we pride ourselves on our achievements, and Gyeongsang-buk-do will continue with our efforts to globalize the region. In 44 countries, we have 102 overseas advisors based on Gyeongsang-buk-do Province and based on Korea. Their hometown may be Gyeongsang-buk-do Province, or they may be ethnic Koreans. They may be engaged in business areas, or so they are the advisors. And they promote the identity of Gyeongsang-buk-do Province. And we have established 9 working groups, and we have the General Assembly, and they promote Gyeongsang-buk-do Province, and they also share the best practices of overseas so that Gyeongsang-buk-do can learn a lot. And so I gave you certain snapshots of the efforts exerted by Gyeongsang-buk-do Province. And we have sisterhood with many regional governments and with many cities around the world. And we invite the public officials from those sister cities. And about 6 months, we invite 15 officials from overseas, and they participate in relevant programs. And we also have the youth, high school students and university students. They come to Korea on visits. And Gyeongsang-buk-do Province is a cultural center, and many youth from overseas are interested in the region. They can experience the Korean culture, and they can learn the know-how of how Korea rose from the ashes of the war to become one of the great economies. I know I don't have much time, so I will conclude my remarks here. Thank you.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you. Gyeongsang-buk-do Province is promoting various public diplomacy activities. And I think that other regional governments can make reference to what Gyeongsangbuk-do province is doing on the basis of mutual prosperity, and such cooperation projects have to be sustainable. So thank you for your comments. So we have just finished the first round, and we have 17 minutes left. There was no question raised by the discussants, so I would like to ask a question, first of all, to Professor Lee Seung-gun.
이런 니어의
The homework that NEAR has is we were founded in 1996 and we are quite active. There was a lot of active participation from the members, and as time passed, we see the level of participation growing less and less. I became the Secretary General last year. I looked back on the participation level since 1996, ranging from China and North Korea, looking at the regional governments of the 6 countries, how actively they participated in the international exchanges. China was most active, and followed by Korea, and the lowest participation was shown by actually Japan. And so that was the current situation. How can we invite more participation? When we look at Europe, everything seems so systematic. When we have such international forums, we need to have participation. Even if we throw a party, if the guests don't come, we have leftover food. You gave us a lot of information in your presentation. What you said 250 regional governments are members of AER, and what is the level of their participation? Does it just evolve around the Secretariat of AER? Could you shed light on the participation level of individual members? Thank you. Secretary General Kim Ok-chae, thank you for your question. Well, I don't think the data is so much important. If you go to the website of AER, there is so much information about participation. I talked about the scenarios, the examples, 1 to 3. There are so many examples of participation. So I think maybe we could collect data. I did ask AER for more information, but there was so much data that they could not deliver information to me in a timely manner. And so everyone is engaged in everything, and AER represents the regional governments and speaks out in different international bodies, and they represent 35 countries. And so there are so many connections to and from AER. Maybe we could do further research on the AER model. I'd like to propose that. Thank you.
우리
Thank you. I would like to now ask a question to Professor Yang Gi-ho. You have been studying Korea-Japan relations for a long time. As you mentioned in your discussion, regional government exchanges between the 2 countries are affected by national government sentiments. And since I became Secretary General of NEAR, that is one of the concerns that I have on my mind. So if you have any good ideas to overcome this, can you share that with us? Thank you for the question. I think that I have given you some burden or homework, but when I think about NEAR, it is almost like a UN of Northeast Asia. We have 78 regional governments that can be considered as individual member states, and Secretary General is like the Secretary General of the UN. And we have to take that approach, otherwise NEAR may not be as effective. And then we need to have local governments that are playing the key roles, and their heads have to be supported, and then there should be strong leadership. Northeast Asia is different from Europe. There are contributions made in Europe, but we don't have such a system in Northeast Asia. So we need to have strong leadership and dedication from the regional governments, especially Korea, Japan, and China. For instance, in Gyeongsang-Buk-do province, they provide budget for the secretariat, but we still have historical issues and territorial disputes, so there's not a lot of exchange with prefectures in Japan. And NEAR, as an independent organization or association, can play a role. Currently in Japan, local governments are struggling with their budgets, and there's aging population, and local government financial situations are not very good. And also in Japan, there's this anti-Korean sentiment. I believe that we have to be active in reaching out to Japan. Gyeongsang-Buk-do province reaches out to a prefecture in Japan, and then we continue to convince other member organizations of China, Mongolia, and Russia, and so on. I think we have a lot of good ideas. For instance, we can utilize the online platform. Currently, we have speakers from Korea, but we can connect with speakers from China and other countries. We can connect them virtually online. Because of the pandemic, we have to utilize the online platform, and I hope that NEAR will develop its online platform so that this can be used as a communication channel. And another idea that I want to share with you is that in Seoul, we have the subway line number 2 that is circular. It goes around Seoul. And I don't think the name matters. What we can call this Pan-Asia or Pan-Japan or Pan-Korea, but we need to create some sort of circle where people can engage in exchanges, and so they can physically experience all these near member countries. And we need support from businesses and also support from the central governments. But if we have such a willingness, if Korea and Japan join hands together, then we can make a lot of progress. And in that sense, I hope that regional governments in Korea and Japan will take leadership and be more active. Thank you.
교수님께서
Thank you, Professor Yang. He talked about how NEAR could play the role of a mini UN that could bring together the regional governments of Northeast Asia, and that I should act like the Secretary General of the UN. And Gyeongsang-Buk-do province is quite active in the regional cooperation. The dispute over territories is in the past, and we need to have frequent exchanges with Japan. And now we have less than 10 minutes left, and we will have a second round of discussion. Please raise your hand, and I will give you the microphone. Professor Kim Hyung-soo.
이 니어의 역할에 대한
I think that there are high expectations upon NEAR, but as far as I know, 9.6 trillion won is the budget for Gyeongsang-Buk-do province, but 1.6 billion won of budget that they allocate for NEAR is very valuable. From the central government's perspective, providing support for NEAR or other platforms does not exist, unfortunately. And when we think about all these activities for public diplomacy at the regional governments, there was some issues related to the audit. And sometimes the central government is quite critical of what the regional governments are doing for public diplomacy. So this is something that we need to revisit. Can regional governments go beyond the scope of national government? This is something that we need to consider. Currently, we have issues between Korea and China and between Korea and Japan. So there are many geopolitical issues that we are experiencing right now. And given the situation, I believe that regional governments can fill in the gap. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Gyeongju City provided supplies to Japan, but it was criticized by the citizens. And this is something that we need to consider. From the perspective of NEAR, we need to promote the level of participation. What I remember is that there is a Tbil region in the Netherlands, and there is another region in Bosnia. There was a foundation in the form of ODA. So it is a city in one country and another city in the third world, and they have a very specific agenda, which is sustainable development, and they get the budget support and other support. So I think that we need to put priority on sustainable development. And now regional governments are playing a key role in promoting sustainable development, and they're also actors of public diplomacy. There are limitations at the state level when it comes to traditional diplomacy. Now cities have to play a bigger role. In Europe, there are many exchanges at the city level and at the regional government level. And as the ambassador mentioned, there is SCI concept of Association of Local Governments and Municipalities in the US as well. Now, NEAR is a very proud organization, and it has to develop agenda items so that we can overcome the boundaries of national states, and we need to identify local needs of local regional governments of different countries. But of course, the restriction is the budget aspect. And to overcome this, I think we need to talk to the central government and get some support. Thank you.
예, 그냥 간단하게 한 1분 내로
I will limit my comments to just 1 minute. How can we invigorate exchange? I would like to share with you a very good system that I have witnessed. I think it's effective. Most of regional cooperation has been government-led, but we should have public-private partnership. I think that would make it sustainable. Then how can we have the regional cooperation that is public-private partnership? For sister cities, each regional government will select an official from the private sector. So one of the residents could be selected as representatives of the sister cities. If there's a public official who is appointed, then they only pay attention when there's an occasion. But if there is a person who is in charge, who is from the private sector, let's say there is a sisterhood between Pohang City and another city in Japan, if there's a person in charge who is from the private sector, I think this can be quite effective. Thank you.
감사합니다.
Thank you for your comments. As Ambassador Ko mentioned, I would like to say a few words. Last year, when I became Secretary General, I looked at the situations of 5 countries, and we appointed goodwill ambassadors, and we're thinking of how to utilize these ambassadors. Next, please. The NEAR framework, if it wants to be sustainable, it has to have a good relations with the central government, of course. But at the same time, we need to identify common interests. We need to expand common interests that can be shared by all NEAR members. If there's no such common ground, then level of participation cannot be heightened. And in medium to long term, it's not only Northeast Asia, but also East Asia is going to be a key region in the world. So it's not only Northeast Asia, but East Asia, and expand the scope of NEAR in the future. That can be our long-term vision so that we can maintain sustainability of this platform. Thank you.
예, 앞으로 이제
Thank you very much. Not only in Northeast Asia, we need to expand to East Asia. We do have quasi-membership. Vietnam is participating as a quasi-member, and we will solidify the foundation of NEAR and then expand membership to East Asia. Who would like to go? Going back to Professor Yang's comment, he talked about Japan. In globalization of the region, we need to improve the Japan-Korea relations. There have been administrative and cultural exchanges that have continued from the past, but this has been reduced because of territorial disputes. Gyeongsang-buk-do is implementing many exchanges with Japan. In the COVID-19 pandemic, what is most important is getting in touch. We do have a lot of teleconferences. We have working level meetings and governor level meetings through video conferencing. So I think we can reduce the physical distance. So if anyone is interested, please actively use that medium. Thank you. Yes, time is almost up. One final comment. Is there anyone? Professor Yang, I will give you 1 minute. Oh, okay. No. Mr. Lee Seung-gun, yes, as a scholar, instead of being too hurried, the European countries engaged in cooperation of the regional governments after World War II. You have to go for the quick wins, and so you need to draw the roadmap, and it can have some spillover into areas unexpected. So please do not make haste. I think you can develop programs gradually. So have patience, give it time. Thank you. Yes, I would like to conclude the session as the moderator. I would like to thank all the participants for your attendance. The Northeast Asia region is witnessing frequent confrontations and conflicts amongst the central governments in the areas of politics, foreign affairs, and security, and that is impacting the exchange amongst the regional governments. NEAR would like to establish grassroots exchanges amongst the regional governments, overcoming the current situation, and there will be more active exchanges using NEAR as the platform. Because of COVID-19 this year, we realized how much human exchanges are precious. In the new year, we hope that the exchanges and cooperation will reopen so that we can have the age of coexistence and co-prosperity in the era. Thank you very much.
예, 이것으로 마치시고 기념 촬영하시겠습니다. 바로